James always thought his life was perfectly arranged. He woke up at 6 a.m., went for a run on the quiet streets of his suburb, listening only to the sound of the wind and the muffled rhythm of his breath. His life was stable, predictable, and, as he believed, ideal. Laura, his girlfriend, embodied everything he valued. They met at a corporate party at his firm, and from that moment, their relationship developed smoothly and confidently. She was kind, caring, and shared all his major life goals. James was sure their life would continue in the same seamless way as it had for the past 3 years. But lately, something within him began to change. The daily routines that once brought him satisfaction now seemed mundane. He caught himself getting irritated by small things. Laura cooked the wrong dish. Her after-work chatter no longer thrilled him. And though he didn't want to admit it, even to himself, he felt emptiness inside. One day during his lunch break, sitting at his desk, he heard the familiar sound of a notification. James instinctively opened his phone, expecting to see another message from a colleague or maybe from Laura. But what he saw made him freeze. On the screen, the name he hadn't seen in a long time lit up. Catherine. He stood still for a moment, staring at the name as if it belonged to someone from the past whom he had long buried in his memory. Catherine was his first love. Their relationship had begun as swiftly as possible in youth, filled with passion, dreams, and plans, but had ended just as abruptly. Everything crumbled, leaving a bitter aftertaste. James struggled to understand why she was writing to him now. What had prompted her to remember him after all these years? He always thought it would remain that way. The message was short. "Hi, James. How are you? I'm in town. Let's meet if you have time." He reread it several times, trying to comprehend. Should he respond? He knew that opening this door could lead to something he had long forgotten, or tried to forget, but something inside him compelled him to type a brief reply. "Hi, Catherine. It would be nice to see you." A few days later, they agreed to meet at the cafe where they used to spend time together. This place had hardly changed. James arrived early to look around and gather his thoughts. He didn't know what to expect from this meeting. He thought his life was stable and secure, but this moment from the past stirred feelings he had long buried. When Catherine walked in, James immediately recognized her. She had changed, but at the same time, she was still the same. Her red hair had darkened slightly, and her gaze seemed more mature and calm, but she was still the Catherine he had once loved. "Hi," she smiled, sitting across from him. "You haven't changed at all." James couldn't help but smile back. He felt old emotions beginning to surface. Catherine had always had that power over him, making him feel more than he wanted. They started chatting about life. She shared that she had traveled a lot over the years, switched jobs several times, and was back in town on business. He, in turn, told her about Laura, his career, and how life had become stable. But in every word, every glance, there was an unexpressed tension. They both knew that beneath the surface lay something deeper than mere friendship. "Are you happy?" Catherine unexpectedly asked, looking straight into James's eyes. That question took him by surprise. He looked away, took a sip of coffee, trying to hide his inner turmoil. Was he happy? This was a question he had avoided for a long time. "Yeah, I guess," he replied uncertainly. "My life has become what I envisioned. I have everything I need." "But is that enough?" she asked softly, her voice quiet but piercing.
If you like this story, follow our channel. Thank you.
After that meeting, James returned home, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Laura welcomed him with her usual care, asked how his day went, and didn't notice how strangely quiet he had become. But in his head, thoughts revolved around Catherine. Memories he had tried to forget began to surface, bringing with them feelings of guilt and confusion. With each passing day, James found himself increasingly consumed by thoughts of the past. He began to revisit old photos, pondering how his life might have turned out if he and Catherine had stayed together. Their encounters started happening more frequently. First casual phone calls, then more meetings at cafes, and eventually walks through familiar places. And with each meeting, their emotional connection grew stronger. Between them, the spark that had never completely extinguished reignited. Catherine reminded him of the times when life felt limitless. full of possibilities. She became a symbol of what he had lost. Laura started noticing changes in James's behavior. He became more distant, had new evening plans, and began staying late at work. One evening, seeing him deep in thought in the kitchen, she asked, "Is everything okay? You've been acting different lately." James didn't know how to respond. He felt guilt, but at the same time, he couldn't let go of the feelings that had rekindled for Catherine. One day, Laura accidentally found his phone on the table. She hadn't intended to check it, but a notification on the screen caught her eye. It was a message from Catherine. Laura couldn't believe her eyes. They had been meeting behind her back. She was waiting for him at home when he returned late that evening. "James, we need to talk." Her voice was cold and filled with pain. He immediately understood what had happened. Laura held his phone in her hands, and her face displayed a mixture of hurt and disappointment. "You lied to me? All this time?" Her voice trembled with repressed emotions. James remained silent. Everything he had hidden now surfaced. Laura was waiting for an answer, but he could say nothing. All the excuses that had spun in his head now seemed meaningless. Laura left, slamming the door behind her, leaving James alone in an empty house. He stood there, feeling as if his entire world had crumbled. Now he had to decide, to fight for his relationship with Laura or to plunge into the past with Catherine. In the following days, James remained alone, immersed in thought. He understood that he couldn't keep living in the past, and that his feelings for Catherine were merely a recollection, an attempt to reclaim lost dreams. He called Catherine and told her what he had long avoided admitting. "Catherine, I'm sorry, but I can't continue this. What happened between us should have remained in the past. We've changed. I've changed." She listened to him in silence. Her voice was calm, but it carried a sense of sadness. "I knew it would end this way, James. I hoped we could make something happen again. But maybe you're right. Our time has passed." And just like that, it was over. Their connection was severed definitively. Catherine left his life as unexpectedly as she had returned. Only Laura remained, the one he had deceived and hurt. Finally, James mustered the courage to try to fix what he had broken. He went to her, standing before her door, feeling his heart racing in his chest. When Laura opened the door, her face remained calm but cold. "James, I'm here to apologize," he began, his voice shaking with emotion. "I made a terrible mistake. I was dishonest with you, but please, give me a chance to make it right. I love you, and I realize you are the most important thing in my life." Laura remained silent for a long time before responding. There was no longer that warmth in her eyes that used to warm his heart. Now her gaze was filled with disappointment. "James, I can't take you back," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "You destroyed everything we had. Trust cannot be rebuilt after what you did. We were happy, but now that's in the past. You are alone now, and I must move on too." With those words, she closed the door in his face, leaving James standing on the doorstep. He stood there for a long time, not believing this was really happening. Inside him, a deep sense of emptiness settled. Laura had left his life, and from that moment on, he was left with nothing. No Laura, no Catherine, none of the dreams that once seemed so real. Now he was alone, in an empty house, with a broken heart, and only memories of what he had lost.